It began with a sound so faint that most machines ignored it. In the endless silence of space, it was nothing more than a whisper, a trembling signal lost among billions of stars. But this signal was not random. It carried rhythm, structure, and a voice filled with fear. It was a message, a desperate call for help that had traveled across light years of darkness. The words once decoded were simple: "Help us, we are dying." The signal came from a distant corner of the galaxy, from a planet no human had ever heard of before. The message was sent by a species known as the Alari, a race of intelligent, graceful beings who had lived in peace for thousands of years. Their world was beautiful once, covered with crystal blue oceans and shining cities that floated in the sky. But now that same world was burning. The Cathar had come, a ruthless alien force that conquered and destroyed without mercy. The Alari's weapons were weak, their defenses outdated, and their armies small. They were not warriors. They were builders, thinkers, dreamers. And now they were helpless. Back on Earth, humanity had grown into a spacefaring civilization. People had built great stations around other planets, sent ships to distant moons, and dreamed of meeting life beyond their solar system. Yet when the alien message arrived, no one expected it. It was discovered by accident. In a quiet observatory floating near the edge of Mars, a young communications officer named Elena Park noticed something strange. Her console showed a repeating signal buried in the background noise. It was weak, nearly impossible to read, but something about it felt intentional. She ran a deep scan, isolated the wave pattern, and her heart stopped when she saw the structure. It was language. Within hours, the signal was sent to Earth for analysis. Scientists, linguists, and military officers gathered in panic and excitement. The message contained data, images, coordinates, and sound. It showed cities under attack, skies filled with fire, and voices crying out in fear. One image showed a towering creature with black armor and glowing red eyes. The enemy! The Cathar world governments argued about what to do. Some believed it was a trap, an alien trick meant to lure humans into danger. Others said it was humanity's duty to respond. For decades, Earth had wondered if they were alone in the universe. Now they had proof they were not, and the first contact they received was not a greeting. It was a scream for help. In a secret meeting beneath Geneva, the United Terran Command, the global defense organization that controlled Earth's space fleet, made its decision. They would send an expedition, not to fight, not yet, but to investigate and understand. A small fleet was chosen. 3 warships, 2 science vessels, and 1 carrier carrying relief supplies. The mission was called Project Dawnlight. It was humanity's first step into a galactic crisis. Captain Adrian Cole was chosen to lead the mission. He was a veteran of Earth's colony wars, a man known for making impossible choices and surviving them. His team included scientists, soldiers, medics, and engineers, the best humanity could offer. Before they left, Adrian stood before the crew and said something that would be remembered forever. "We are not just going to explore. We are going to answer." The journey took months. The fleet crossed systems no human had ever mapped before. They saw dying suns, broken planets, and the cold beauty of uncharted space. The deeper they went, the weaker the Alari signal became, until only fragments remained. But then, after weeks of silence, they saw it. A faint blue star surrounded by burning debris. Around it spun a ruined planet. The surface was scarred by massive craters and firestorms. Entire continents were blackened. The ships descended through smoke and lightning, scanning for life signs. What they found was shocking. Small pockets of survivors living in underground shelters. When the first human stepped onto the surface, cameras transmitted the image back to Earth. Billions of people watched in silence as a human soldier in gray armor reached out a hand to a trembling, silver-skinned alien with glowing eyes. 2 species meeting for the first time, one broken, the other hardened by survival. The Alari were unlike anything humans had imagined. They were tall and graceful, with delicate limbs and skin that shimmered in faint light. They spoke through musical tones that translated slowly into human speech. They told their story, how the Cathar had come from deep space, destroying their colonies and enslaving their people. How their cities had fallen one by one, and how, when all hope was lost, they sent the message, not expecting anyone to answer. They called the humans Deathworlders. The term came from their scientists' study of Earth. To them, Earth was a nightmare planet, Violent storms, deadly diseases, countless predators, and a gravity field stronger than most habitable worlds. By all logic, life should not have evolved there. Yet humanity not only survived, it thrived. To the Aelari, humans were creatures forged by chaos, born fighters, shaped by a world that demanded strength just to breathe. At first, the Aelari feared them. The humans moved with military precision. Their machines roared like thunder and their eyes were hard, trained to scan for danger. But there was also compassion. Medics treated alien wounds. Engineers repaired damaged shelters. Soldiers helped bury the dead. The Aelari could not understand it. Such power mixed with such empathy. Captain Cole spent days walking the ruins with Aelari leaders. He saw the burnt schools, the destroyed gardens, the shattered statues of peace. Each time he asked, "Who did this?" the same answer came, the Kethar. No one had ever fought them and survived. They were bigger, faster, and ruthless. The Aelari had tried everything: negotiations, evacuations, surrender, and still the Kethar slaughtered them. Back on Earth, the news spread like wildfire. Humanity had found life, and it was suffering. Protests erupted, demanding the government send reinforcements. Religious groups called the event a test of faith. Scientists wanted to study the aliens, while politicians argued about cost and risk. But ordinary people saw it differently. They saw a cry for help. And humanity had always answered cries for help, from fires, floods, wars, and disasters. Why should the stars be any different? In the following weeks, the Aelari showed the humans their archives, maps of Kethar fleets, recordings of battles, and the ruins of their once great capital. The horror was undeniable. The Kethar were not just conquerors. They were exterminators. They destroyed ecosystems, enslaved survivors, and stripped planets bare. Humanity had seen cruelty before, but never on this scale. For the soldiers, it felt familiar, like the worst pages of their own history repeating among the stars. Then came the moment that changed everything. A small Aelari child, no older than 8, approached a human soldier standing guard outside the shelter. The child carried a broken data tablet showing a picture of their home before the war: blue skies, shining towers, and families laughing. The soldier looked at it, then at the child's tear-streaked face, and without a word he knelt and promised, "We'll stop them." That small moment spread through the camp like fire. The Aelari, for the first time in years, began to believe they might survive. Captain Cole sent a message back to Earth, simple and clear: "This is no trap. They are real, and they need us." He included recordings of the devastation and testimonies from survivors. When the message reached the Terran command, silence followed. Then the order came: prepare for deployment. Humanity, for all its flaws, had one defining trait: when pushed, it fought back. And now, with the Aelari's cries echoing through their hearts, the Deathworlders were about to show the galaxy what that truly meant. As the fleet prepared for war, the stars outside shimmered like silent witnesses. The Aelari watched the humans work, building defenses, repairing ships, training with purpose and calm fury. They had never seen such focus. One Aelari elder whispered, "They are not from a peaceful world, are they?" Captain Cole looked at her and replied quietly, "No. We come from a world that tried to kill us every day. That's why we're still here." And in that moment, something changed. Fear turned to respect. Desperation turned to hope. For the first time since the war began, the Aelari believed that maybe, just maybe, the Deathworlders could save them. The universe had sent them a message of pain. Humanity had heard it, and humanity was on its way. When the human fleet finally entered the orbit of the dying Aelari world, silence filled every ship. Through the thick windows of the command deck, Captain Adrian Cole could see the planet below, a wounded world gasping for breath. Clouds of ash covered its skies, and oceans boiled where bombs had fallen. What once might have been a paradise now looked like a scar across the galaxy. The crew, hardened soldiers and explorers, stood quietly. They had seen wars before, but nothing like this. The first landing teams moved out quickly. Massive shuttles dropped through the stormy atmosphere, guided by flickering beacons from the surviving Aelari shelters. As they descended, lightning flashed across the sky, revealing the skeletons of cities half buried in rubble. It was as if the planet itself mourned its people. When the ships landed, the Aelari came forward, weak and trembling, their shining eyes filled with both fear and hope. The moment humans stepped onto the alien soil, The Alari realized they were unlike anyone they had ever met. These newcomers were taller, heavier, and moved with the careful strength of creatures who had learned to survive on a dangerous world. Their armor was thick, their weapons powerful, and their voices carried confidence. The Alari called them Deathworlders because their planet, Earth, was known to be one of the most violent worlds ever recorded. Everything on that planet could kill. Storms, diseases, predators, even the land itself. Yet somehow life not only survived there, it thrived. The Alari's first reaction was fear. To them, the humans looked like warriors from their ancient legends, beings shaped by suffering and conflict. But when the humans began distributing food, medicine, and water, that fear began to fade. The soldiers shared what they had, even removing their helmets to show their faces. They were scarred, tired, but kind. They spoke softly to the children and helped the wounded. For the Alari, it was the first sign of kindness they had seen in years. While the medics worked, scientists from the human ships began studying the ruins. They wanted to understand what had happened, how the Kether had managed to destroy a civilization so advanced. The Alari's technology was beautiful but fragile. Their machines were built for art and peace, not for war. Their defense systems had been designed to scare away asteroids, not invading armies. The Kether had torn through them like a storm. Captain Cole spent long hours listening to the stories of survivors. He learned that the Kether had arrived without warning, descending from the skies in massive black ships. They destroyed communications first, then factories, then cities. The Alari had tried to reason with them to send messages of peace, but the Kether never answered. They only attacked, enslaving anyone they captured and killing those who resisted. The Alari Council, now reduced to only a handful of leaders, met with Captain Cole in the ruins of their old capital. The meeting took place inside a half-destroyed building that once served as a government hall. The roof was gone and the wind howled through the cracks. The Alari leader, Elder Vera, stood tall despite her frail frame. Her silver skin shimmered faintly as she spoke. "We sent our message into the stars," she said, her voice trembling. "We did not think anyone would come. And now you are here, but we do not understand why. Why risk your lives for strangers?" Captain Cole looked around at the destruction. The broken towers, the burned gardens, the streets filled with ashes. He thought about Earth's own past, the wars, the hunger, the rebuilding. He replied softly, "Because once we were like you. We know what it's like to be desperate, to lose everything and still hope someone will help. We heard your call. That was enough." For a long moment, no one spoke. The Alari simply looked at him. This rough, battle-scarred man standing among ruins, speaking with quiet conviction. In that moment, they began to understand something new about humanity. The humans were not there for power or glory or conquest. They were there because they couldn't ignore a cry for help. Days turned into weeks as humans and Alari worked side by side. The humans built shelters using metal from their ships, installed generators to bring light back to the underground cities, and set up defenses around the surviving colonies. The Alari were amazed by how fast they worked. Humans could survive in harsh conditions, freezing nights, acid rains, and thin air, things that would kill most other species. They called it adaptation. For humans, it was simply life. But while the rebuilding continued, the danger had not ended. Human satellites detected strange energy signatures on the far side of the planet. It was the Kether. They were still there, hunting for survivors. When Captain Cole saw the readings, he knew what it meant. The enemy was watching. Humanity's arrival had not gone unnoticed. The first encounter happened at dawn. A human patrol was scouting the edge of a ruined city when they were ambushed. The Kether were monstrous. Tall, armored beings with black scales and glowing red eyes. They moved fast and struck hard. The fight lasted only minutes, but when it was over, 2 human soldiers were dead, and the rest barely made it back. It was the first blood spilled between the 2 species, but not the last. After that attack, Captain Cole called for a full defensive perimeter. Heavy weapons were deployed, drones sent to patrol the skies, and every soldier was put on alert. The Alari, frightened and unsure, offered what little they could: maps, data, and old weapon designs. The humans studied everything. They were preparing for something bigger. Meanwhile, relationships between humans and Alari began to grow. The scientists exchanged knowledge. The Alari taught about energy crystals and star drives, while humans shared medicine, metallurgy, and communication systems. The Elari were fascinated by human creativity. "You build everything with such purpose," one of them said. "Even your machines look like they want to fight." Some Elari children began to follow the soldiers, copying their drills, laughing for the first time in months. To them, the humans were heroes. Strange, loud, sometimes frightening, but full of courage. For the Elari adults, it was still hard to believe. They had lived in fear for so long that hope felt like a dangerous dream. One evening, as the twin moons rose over the shattered skyline, Captain Cole and Elder Vera stood together watching the stars. "Do you think your people can defeat the Kethar?" she asked quietly. Cole took a deep breath. "Defeat? I don't know. But fight? Yes, that's something we've always done. It's who we are." That night, the Elari sent out a signal of their own, not an SOS, but a message of alliance. For the first time, their transmission included two symbols side by side, the Elari crest and the Terran emblem. Across the galaxy, other species intercepted it. Most ignored it, thinking it foolish. After all, the Kethar were unstoppable. But one phrase in the message caught attention everywhere. "The Deathworlders have answered." As the days passed, the humans explored further. They found abandoned Kethar outposts, twisted metal machines, and strange markings that suggested the invaders were preparing something much larger, a total planetary cleansing. It became clear that the Kethar weren't just finishing a war. They wanted to erase the Elari completely. When Captain Cole shared this discovery with Elder Vera, she broke down. Her people had already lost so much. "They will come again," she whispered. "And when they do, we will be gone." But Captain Cole looked at her with steady eyes. "Not while we're here." In the following weeks, the human ships began to fortify the skies. They launched defense satellites, weaponized drones, and orbital cannons. Every day, the Elari watched as the humans turned their dying planet into a fortress. The air filled with the hum of engines and the clang of metal. For the first time in years, the sound of war brought not fear, but hope. The Elari began to join them. With human training, they learned to use weapons to fight, to defend their homes. Their soft hands that once painted and built began to hold rifles. Their eyes, once filled with sorrow, began to burn with determination. Humanity had not just brought soldiers, and it had brought the will to resist. One night, the sky lit up with fire. A human ship intercepted a small Kethar scout vessel trying to leave the atmosphere. The humans destroyed it in seconds. The explosion could be seen from the ground and a bright flash against the stars. The Elari gathered outside, watching silently. Some cried, others whispered prayers. For them, it was more than a victory. It was proof that the Kethar could bleed, and so the alliance was born in fire and fear, but also in courage. The humans, the Deathworlders, had come not just to help, but to stand beside the broken and make them strong again. The Elari began to believe that maybe the universe had not abandoned them after all. Maybe their SOS had reached the only species fierce enough to answer. Deep inside the command center, Captain Cole looked at the stars and sent one message back to Earth. "We found them. We've made contact. And we're not leaving." Humanity had crossed the stars not for conquest, not for power, but for something greater, to prove that even in the darkest corners of the universe, mercy could travel faster than light. The Elari had found hope again, and the Deathworlders had found their purpose. The real war was still coming. But for now, for the first time in a long time, there was light on the horizon. The war began quietly, almost like a shadow moving across the sky. At first, the humans thought the Kethar were retreating, regrouping somewhere beyond the planet's orbit. But soon the truth became clear. They were preparing for a full-scale invasion. Every sensor, every satellite the humans launched started picking up strange signals. Massive energy spikes, encrypted transmissions, and movements of fleets far beyond the horizon. The silence before the storm. Captain Adrian Cole stood on the command deck of the Valiant, the lead ship of the Terran fleet, watching the data streams flicker across the screens. Around him, the crew worked without rest. The Elari were doing their best to help, but their technology was not designed for war. Humanity had to adapt everything, build, repair, and prepare while the enemy gathered strength. For the Elari, fear returned like an old ghost. For the humans, it was just another day before battle. In the underground city of Lysara, where the survivors now lived, soldiers trained day and night. Human instructors taught Elari volunteers how to shoot, how to defend, how to survive. The Elari struggled at first. Their hands trembled when they held weapons, and the sound of gunfire made them flinch. They were not born for war. but desperation turned them into students eager to learn. The humans were patient. They had trained recruits in worse places before. Deserts, jungles, frozen moons. The Aulari children watched as the humans worked. They saw how the Deathworlders carried themselves, how they laughed in the face of danger, how they kept going even when exhausted. To the Aulari, humans were strange creatures. They joked during training, sang songs while loading weapons, and shared stories around small fires. It was confusing and inspiring all at once. How could a species capable of such destruction still find time to laugh? Meanwhile, in orbit, human engineers modified the ships using Aulari technology. The fusion of both civilizations created something entirely new. Aulari energy crystals powered human cannons, and human armor protected Aulari-built drones. It was a partnership forged from necessity and respect. The Aulari began to see that humanity's greatest weapon was not its guns or ships. It was its ability to adapt, to learn, and to turn pain into strength. Then, one night, the sky broke open. The Kithar had arrived. Without warning, their ships descended like burning meteors, dark and massive, blotting out the stars. The first blast hit the western hemisphere, vaporizing an entire mountain range. The ground shook. Sirens wailed through the shelters. Captain Cole's voice echoed across every channel. All hands to battle stations. They're here. The humans launched their ships, engines roaring, weapons ready. Aulari pilots, newly trained, took to the skies beside them. For the first time in history, their fragile vessels carried weapons instead of research tools. The battle began above the planet in the upper atmosphere. Lasers lit the sky like red lightning. Human fighters weaved between massive enemy cruisers, dodging plasma fire and returning volleys of their own. The Aulari's energy shield shimmered, protecting the human ships from the first deadly wave. On the ground, the fighting was brutal. Kethar landing ships smashed into cities, unleashing waves of alien soldiers. The humans met them head-on. They were outnumbered but not outmatched. Every move was calculated, every strike precise. The Kethar were powerful, towering creatures with thick armor and claws that could tear through steel. But the humans had something the Kethar didn't understand: strategy, teamwork, and stubborn willpower. A squad led by Sergeant Malik fought in the ruins of an old Aulari library. The building was half collapsed, flames licking at its marble walls. The Aulari fought beside them, firing energy rifles with shaking hands. Malik's voice was calm through the chaos. "Hold the line. Don't let them through." When the Kethar advanced, the humans used everything, grenades, drones, even the rubble itself, to push them back. Every battle was fierce, but humanity refused to retreat. The Kethar, used to crushing weaker enemies, were stunned by the Deathworlders' resistance. For every soldier they killed, 2 more took their place. For every ship they destroyed, the humans rebuilt stronger ones. The Kethar called them the Endless because they seemed impossible to defeat. As days turned into weeks, the planet became a living battlefield. Smoke covered the skies, cities burned, and both sides suffered heavy losses. Yet something unexpected began to happen. The Aulari changed. They were no longer helpless victims. They were fighters now, inspired by the humans who stood beside them. Aulari engineers built drones that carried human weapons. Their scientists developed shields that could block Kethar plasma fire. The once peaceful species was learning the art of survival. One night, during a lull in the fighting, Captain Cole met with Elder Vera in the command bunker. Her once bright eyes were dim with exhaustion. "How do your people keep fighting?" she asked. "How do you face such horror and not lose yourselves?" Cole looked at her for a long moment. "We have," he said quietly, "many times. But we keep going, because if we stop, we lose everything that matters. We fight so others don't have to." The words spread like fire among the Aulari soldiers. They began to paint symbols of Earth on their armor, small blue circles with green streaks, a mark of unity. They started calling their new alliance the Flame, because wherever humans went, they brought fire. Not just destruction, but light in the darkness. The turning point came during the siege of the Eastern Valley. The Kethar launched a massive assault, sending thousands of troops and armored carriers across the plains. The human-Aulari alliance was outnumbered 5-1. Retreat seemed certain, but Captain Cole refused to give up. He ordered every unit to hold their ground. "We're Deathworlders," he said over the comms. "We don't run. We bite back." The battle raged for 2 days. The skies were filled with fire. Human artillery pounded the Kethar lines while Alari drones dived through the chaos, exploding against enemy tanks. When ammunition ran low, soldiers fought hand-to-hand using anything they could, blades, rocks, even bare fists. The Kethar advanced relentlessly, but every step forward cost them blood. Then, at the height of the battle, the Valiant entered low orbit. Its main cannon charged, glowing brighter than the sun. With a single shot, it fired a focused beam that tore through the Kethar command ship. The explosion lit up the sky like dawn. The Kethar forces faltered, their command chain shattered. The humans seized the moment. "Push forward," shouted Malik. The line surged ahead and the Kethar broke. When the smoke cleared, the valley was silent. Thousands of bodies, human, Alari, and Kethar, lay across the battlefield. Victory had come at a terrible price, but it was victory nonetheless. For the first time, the Kethar retreated. The Alari stood among the ruins, staring in disbelief. They had survived. After the battle, the survivors gathered to honor the fallen. Alari and humans stood side by side as torches burned in the dark. Elder Vera spoke softly. "For centuries, we believed peace was our greatest strength. But peace without courage is fragile. You Deathworlders have reminded us that sometimes to protect life, we must fight for it." Captain Cole simply nodded. "War is never glory," he said. "But sometimes it's the only way to stop monsters." As days passed, news of the victory spread through the galaxy. The legend of the Deathworlders began to grow. To many, they were terrifying. Beings who came from a planet that tried to kill them daily, who fought not because they loved war, but because they refused to let others suffer alone. The Kethar, who once believed themselves unstoppable, began to fear them. The war was far from over, but something had changed forever. Humanity and the Alari were now bonded by blood and purpose. The Alari rebuilt their cities with human guidance. Their once silent streets echoed again, not with songs of peace, but with the hum of factories, the rhythm of progress. They were no longer just survivors. They were warriors reborn, and as the Terran fleet prepared for the next offensive, Captain Cole looked up at the stars and said to his crew, "They called us Deathworlders. Let's show them what that really means." From that day forward, the galaxy would remember the humans not as conquerors, but as protectors, the soldiers from a dangerous world who answered a call for help with fire and fury, and taught the peaceful how to fight for their own future. The war dragged on for months, turning the once beautiful Alari world into a battlefield of ash and smoke. Every mountain, every ocean, every city had become a place of struggle. The humans and Alari fought together day and night, refusing to surrender. But both sides knew something was coming, something bigger. The Kethar were regrouping, gathering their strongest forces for one final strike. The humans called it the Storm. The Alari whispered that it would decide the fate of their entire race. In the command center of the human flagship Valiant, Captain Adrian Cole studied the incoming data with tired eyes. The enemy fleet was massive, far larger than anything they had faced before. Thousands of Kethar ships were moving toward the planet. The air in the room felt heavy as everyone realized what it meant. This wasn't just another attack. It was extermination. The Kethar wanted to end it once and for all. Captain Cole looked at the map projected before him. Red dots showing the Kethar, blue for the human and Alari alliance. There were far too many red dots. He took a deep breath and said quietly, "We hold the line. No matter what comes." Orders spread across every channel. The Alari began evacuating civilians deeper underground while the humans prepared their defense grids. Fighters were refueled, weapons loaded, and ships repositioned in orbit. On the ground, soldiers dug trenches and reinforced bunkers. Everyone knew the Kethar would not stop until the planet was dust. But no one backed down. The night before the attack, the soldiers gathered around small fires. The air was cold and the stars seemed distant and uncaring. An Alari engineer sat beside a human mechanic, both working silently on a damaged drone. After a while, the engineer asked, "Do you think we'll win?" The human smiled tiredly. "Win or lose," he said, tightening a bolt, "we'll make them remember this day." At dawn, the sky split open. The Kethar came like a dark wave. Their ships entered the atmosphere, lighting the clouds on fire. The sound was deafening. Thunder, explosions, and screams blended together. The humans fired first, unleashing beams of light and missiles into the sky. The Alari joined in, their new weapons powered by both technology and courage. The war had begun again, but this time humanity was ready. The first hours were chaos. Kethar dropships landed in waves, each one filled with monstrous soldiers. They tore through defenses with brutal strength, but everywhere they went, the Deathworlders were waiting. Human snipers picked them off from high towers, and Aelari drones flew overhead, dropping plasma bombs. It was a storm of fire and metal. In orbit, the battle was even more intense. The Valiant and her sister ships fought against overwhelming odds. The sky above the planet burned with explosions. Captain Cole's voice echoed across all frequencies. "Hold your ground. No one retreats." His words carried strength even through the noise. Every soldier, every pilot, every ship fought harder. Then came the moment that changed everything. A massive Kethar dreadnought appeared. A ship larger than any seen before, its hull covered in black armor that absorbed light. It began firing a planet-destroying weapon that could vaporize entire cities. One shot hit a nearby human base, turning it into dust. The Aelari screamed through their communicators. It seemed unstoppable. Captain Cole knew what had to be done. "Target that ship," he ordered. "All units focus fire." Dozens of missiles and beams struck the dreadnought, but its shields held strong. The humans kept firing anyway, refusing to stop. Then the Aelari made a desperate move. A group of their pilots volunteered for a suicide run, to fly their fragile fighters straight into the dreadnought's weapon system. Elder Vera herself gave the order. "For our world," she said quietly. The Aelari ships rose into the sky, glowing like fireflies against the darkness. The Kethar fired at them, destroying many, but a few broke through. They crashed into the weapon core, and in an instant the dreadnought exploded. The blast was so bright it turned night into day. Everyone on the ground saw it. For a moment the battlefield fell silent. The impossible had happened. The invincible ship was gone. But the victory came at a cost. The Aelari pilots were lost, their names forever burned into memory. Elder Vera watched the sky and whispered their names one by one. "They saved us," she said, tears running down her silver face. The destruction of the dreadnought changed everything. The Kethar fleet began to fall apart. Without their command ship, their coordination broke down. The humans took advantage, pushing forward with everything they had. Fighter squadrons tore through enemy lines. Ground troops advanced across the ruins, driving the Kethar back step by step. Sergeant Malik led his unit through the shattered streets of what was once the Aelari capital. His armor was covered in dust and blood. Every corner was a fight. Kethar soldiers hiding among the rubble, humans and Aelari charging through with grenades and courage. Malik shouted over the noise, "Don't stop. Push them to the sea." And they did. Slowly, painfully, the Kethar began to retreat. The humans chased them through the burning cities, through the forests turned to ash until they reached the landing zones where the Kethar ships waited. But there was no mercy. Humanity had seen what the Kethar had done, the mass graves, the burned children, the ruined planet. This time they would end it. In orbit, Captain Cole gave the final command. All ships, full bombardment. The sky filled with light as human cannons fired one last time. The Kethar fleet was ripped apart. One by one, their ships exploded, scattering debris into space. The largest remaining cruiser tried to flee, but a human fighter squadron intercepted it, destroying it before it could jump away. Within hours, the invasion fleet was gone. The planet was safe. When the last explosion faded, the silence that followed was strange. No gunfire, no alarms, just the wind blowing through the ruins. Soldiers looked at each other, too tired to cheer. Many fell to their knees, crying or laughing in disbelief. The Aelari emerged from their shelters, staring at the sky now filled with peaceful stars. For the first time in generations, they were free. Captain Cole stood on the bridge of the Valiant, looking down at the planet. His uniform was torn, his voice hoarse. "It's over," he said softly. "We did it." But deep inside, he knew it wasn't victory without pain. Thousands had died, human and Aelari alike. The cost of survival was heavy. On the surface, Elder Vera walked among the wounded, her hands glowing with soft light as she healed those she could. When she found Captain Cole later, she said, "You saved us. You saved everything we are." Cole shook his head. "No. We just gave you back the chance to fight for yourselves." The Aelari began to rebuild immediately. Together with human engineers, they cleared the ruins and planted new seeds in the soil. Children played again among the broken buildings, their laughter echoing where screams once filled the air. The humans helped them set up schools, hospitals, and defenses, not as conquerors but as allies. News of the victory spread quickly across the galaxy. Other races heard whispers of the event. that the Kethar had been defeated not by superior numbers or technology, but by the Deathworlders, creatures from a savage planet who fought with unmatched fury. To some, it was terrifying. To others, it was hope. If humanity could defeat the Kethar, maybe there was a chance for peace in the stars after all. Months later, a ceremony was held in the rebuilt capital. Monuments were raised for the fallen, both Ilari and human. A massive stone stood in the center, engraved with the words, "We answered the call." The Ilari sang a song of remembrance, their voices echoing across the valley. As the music faded, Captain Cole spoke to the crowd. His voice was rough but steady. "You called for help," he said, looking at the Ilari gathered before him. "And we came. Not because we wanted war, but because we couldn't stand by and watch another world die. You showed us that courage doesn't come from strength. It comes from hope. And as long as there's hope, there's a reason to fight." The crowd stood in silence, tears shining in their eyes. Then Elder Vera stepped forward and placed her hand on his chest. "You are no longer just Deathworlders to us," she said. "You are family." The alliance between Earth and Ilari became the first step toward something greater, a united defense of peace across the stars. The Kethar were not destroyed completely, but they were broken, scattered, and hunted, and wherever they tried to rise again, the Deathworlders would be waiting. That night, as Captain Cole looked at the stars from the observation deck, he thought about everything that had happened, the battles, the losses, the friendships. He whispered to himself, "We answered their SOS, and we brought them war, but maybe that's what they needed to survive." The stars outside shone brighter than before. Somewhere in the endless dark, new worlds watched, wondering who the Deathworlders were, and whether, when their own SOS came, humanity would answer again. Months turned into years after the Great War on Elara. The world that had once been filled with ruins and fire was slowly healing. Green leaves began to grow again over blackened soil. Rivers ran clear and the air no longer smelled of smoke and death. Cities were being rebuilt with the help of both humans and Ilari. Towers of glass and silver rose again, stronger and brighter than before. The scars of war remained, but they were now reminders of what both species had survived together. Captain Adrian Cole stayed on Elara longer than he planned. He was supposed to return to Earth after the victory, but something inside him kept him there. Maybe it was the sense of responsibility, or maybe it was the bond he had formed with the Ilari people. Every day, he walked through the rebuilding streets, helping where he could, teaching, repairing, guiding. To many Ilari children, he became a symbol of strength, the human who came from a distant, dangerous world and stood between them and extinction. Elder Vera, the wise leader of the Ilari, often met with him on the high terraces overlooking the new capital. They would talk for hours about the future, about peace, unity, and the lessons of war. "The stars are full of danger," Vera once said softly, "but they are also full of hope. We only need to look with open eyes." Cole nodded, knowing that hope was what kept humanity alive for centuries, even when everything seemed impossible. The humans didn't just bring weapons. They brought knowledge. They shared technology, medicine, and ideas. The Ilari were fascinated by human art and stories, tales of a world that had learned to survive its own wars and disasters. In return, the Ilari taught humans about harmony with nature, energy drawn from the planet's heart, and music that could heal wounds. Together they built something new, a world that combined the strength of Earth and the grace of Elara. But even as peace grew, shadows lingered. Across the galaxy, word of the Kethar's defeat spread like wildfire. Some alien races were inspired. They reached out to join the new alliance forming between humans and Ilari. Others were afraid. They whispered about the Deathworlders, about the species that answered cries for help with unstoppable fury. To them, humanity was not just saviors. They were a warning. In the deep void of space, fragments of the Kethar fleet drifted silently. But within those fragments, something still moved. The Kethar were not completely destroyed. Scattered survivors had begun to regroup, hiding in distant systems, rebuilding in the shadows. They had learned from their defeat, and their hatred burned brighter than ever. They promised vengeance, not just on the Ilari, but on the humans who had brought them humiliation. Captain Cole knew this. Intelligence reports from human scouts spoke of strange signals at the edge of known space. He stood before the holographic map, tracing the faint trails of energy signatures. "They're not gone," he murmured. "They're waiting." Elder Vera stood beside him, her expression calm yet sad. "Then we must be ready," she said. "Because when darkness returns, light must rise again." Years passed, and the alliance of Earth and Alara grew stronger. New planets joined, some small, some mighty. They formed a council, where leaders from different species met to discuss peace and defense. For the first time in galactic history, there was unity instead of chaos. But unity was fragile. Some feared the humans, some envied them, and some wanted to use them. Back on Earth, humanity had changed too. The war had united their governments and given them a new purpose. No longer were they fighting each other over borders or politics. Now they looked outward, toward the stars. They built new ships, stronger fleets, and trained soldiers who understood not just war but responsibility. The words "We answered the call" became a motto engraved on every starship hull. On Alara, life blossomed again. Children born after the war grew up under clear skies. Listening to stories of courage and sacrifice, they learned that their world had once cried for help, and strangers from a distant planet had come to save them. To them, the humans were not monsters or Deathworlders. They were heroes, brothers and sisters from another sky. One day, a small ceremony was held at the edge of the rebuilt capital. It marked the 10th anniversary of the Kethar's defeat. Thousands gathered, Ailari, humans, and representatives from new allied species. Captain Cole stood on the same stone platform where he had once given his speech after the war. His hair had turned gray, his uniform worn from years of service, but his eyes still held the same determination. He looked at the crowd before him and said, 10 years ago, we answered a call for help. We didn't come as conquerors. We came because we couldn't ignore suffering. We came because that's what humanity is. We fight for those who can't." The crowd listened in silence. Cole continued, "But peace is not the absence of war. It's the courage to stand together when war threatens again, and it will. The Kethar are still out there. Maybe others like them too. When that time comes, I hope we'll remember what we built here. Not with fear, but with unity." Elder Vera stepped forward, her eyes shining with pride. "You taught us that hope is a weapon stronger than any gun," she said. "And together, we have become something greater than either of us alone." After the ceremony, as the sun set over the silver towers, Captain Cole walked alone to the memorial field, the place where the names of every fallen soldier were engraved, both human and Ailari. He traced his fingers over the cold stone, reading names he still remembered. The Ailari pilots who had given their lives, his crew who never came back, and countless others who fought for a world that wasn't even their own. He whispered softly, "We did it. You'd be proud of what you helped build." The wind carried his words away as if the spirits of the fallen were listening. Later that night, Cole sat on a high balcony, looking at the stars. Elder Vera joined him, carrying 2 cups of a glowing Ailari drink. They sat in silence for a long time. Finally, she asked, "Will you ever go home?" He smiled faintly. "Maybe someday. But this feels like home now." She nodded. "You humans are strange. You come from a world that tried to kill you every day, like storms, beasts, sickness. And yet you still find time to care for others. That is why you are called Deathworlders, not because of your planet, but because nothing, not even death, stops you." He laughed softly. Maybe that's true. Far above them, ships of the Alliance drifted in orbit, human designs mixed with Ailari elegance, symbols of unity glowing on their hulls. They weren't warships anymore. They were explorers, scientists, and diplomats. The galaxy was vast, and there were still countless worlds unknown. But this time, humanity and their allies would face it together. One evening, a new signal reached Alara, a faint distress call from a distant sector, weak and broken, just like the one that started it all years ago. The communication officers in the command center picked it up, analyzed it, and brought it to Captain Cole. He listened carefully to the repeating message. It was another SOS. He stood silently for a while, then looked out the window at the stars. Elder Vera entered the room, understanding the look on his face without words. "Another call for help?" she asked. He nodded. "Yes, someone else out there needs us. Will you answer?" she asked. He smiled, the same fierce, determined smile he had worn years ago when he first arrived. "Of course," he said. "That's what we do." Within days, the ships of the Alliance prepared to depart. Soldiers, engineers, medics, and volunteers from every race gathered, ready to travel into the unknown. The old motto was spoken again across every communicator, every base, every ship. We answer the call. As the fleet rose into the night sky, the people of Alara watched from below. The ships shimmered like stars, leaving trails of light as they vanished into the void. The children waved, and Elder Vera whispered a quiet prayer. In the distance, far beyond what any telescope could see, the faint cries of another dying world echoed across the stars. And once again the Deathworlders, the humans, answered. But this time they weren't alone. The Aulari and their new allies went with them, because now, the galaxy knew one truth. When darkness rises and hope fades somewhere in the endless night, the Deathworlders will come, and not to destroy but to save. And when they do, the stars themselves will burn brighter. The story of the Aulari and the humans became legend, told across countless worlds, in songs, murals, and books. It wasn't just the story of war. It was the story of compassion, sacrifice, and the unbreakable will to protect life. Generations later, when children looked up at the stars and asked who saved the galaxy, their parents would smile and say, "The Deathworlders did." They heard a cry for help, and they answered. And so, under the endless sky, peace reigned, not perfect, not eternal, but alive. And as long as there were stars to light the darkness, there would always be those brave enough to answer the call.